the greatest.
Yeah, you could be there all day. All right, we ready?
You're all set.
Good morning, Peachtree Road. I'm J.D. Kellum, agent here in the office, and unfortunately I've had some experience with trees, so we're going to talk about trees today. I have a riddle for you. The tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it. Who's going to put it on Facebook?
That's right.
Right? So this all kind of started because I had some experience, unfortunately, with a neighbor's tree, and I put it on Facebook on the Rawls group, and we had such dialogue back and forth. Then I went to James and Robin and said, hey, why don't we bring in a couple of professionals and talk about this, because this is really, as many years as you may have been in the business or you may be brand new, you're going to encounter this at some point, either personally with your own property or with your clients. And it's really good, when you're in due diligence, that's the time to start talking about trees, right? If you're walking around the yard with the buyer and you're like, I don't know about that tree, I don't know about this tree. Because if you're going to negotiate for removal or something with a seller, now that's the time to start talking about it. So sooner than later, get started talking about it. Well, Atlanta's known as the city of trees. I'm sure you've all heard that expression before. In fact, the statistics are that we have the nation's largest tree canopy, with about 48% of our city covered in trees. Now, as that compares nationally, the national average is about 27% with other major cities. So all this talk about, protect our trees, save our trees, we have plenty of trees. We're a city in a forest, and it's great that we can claim that. 80% of that canopy is on single-family property. So more often than not, when things happen, it falls back on homeowners, right? So it's very important for us to know how to protect ourselves, protect our clients. The statistics on damage, OSHA, which is the Office of Safety and Health Administration, something like Occupational Safety and Health Administration, reports that every year in the nation, over 100 people die as a result of falling trees and falling limbs. And I tried to look for estimates on property damage, and it was well up in the millions. I'm sure Carrie can attest. So it's very important, and I'm sure you've all heard in the news within the last few years, just here in Atlanta, Georgia, there was a couple driving in Virginia Highland in their SUV with their child during a storm. A tree came down and crushed the SUV, and the father was driving. He survived, killed the wife and the child. Very tragic. So this is a really serious issue, and something to really focus on. What do we do when there's damage? How to prevent damage. We're going to talk about all that. First, I'd like to introduce our guest this morning. We have Kerry Mitchell from Kerry Mitchell State Farm, and I could read off all of his accomplishments, but the guy really knows what he's doing. He's president of the Chamblee Chamber of Commerce. Kerry's been in business for over 20 years?
10 years.
10 years, all right. Built a successful 20-year career in supply chain management, working with a lot of Fortune 100 companies. So he brings a business acumen to insurance, which is really great. So Kerry's with us, and then Charlie Pollard, our partner, and Kerry's in our vendor program as well. And Charlie is our closing attorney here with Manamy McLeod Heller. I said that without stuttering.
Pretty good.
And so we're going to talk from a legal aspect as well as from an insurance aspect. So we're going to talk removals versus repair, okay? And then we're going to delve into a couple of scenarios, and then we're going to let these guys kind of give their opinion and their perspective on what to do to prevent and what to do when it happens. The first scenario I want to talk about is a tree is dying, okay? This happened to me. My neighbor's tree was dying, and I told her about it for 2 years. I kept telling her, top, that tree's dying, and she kept saying, that tree's alive, I love that tree. Yeah, I love that tree. So it was dying from the top down. It's a poplar. It was dying from the top down. Every time there was a storm, there was a limb in my yard, and I knew it was just a matter of time before it caused property damage. Well, sure enough, the whole top of the tree came off during that last storm and hit my pool cabana. So I didn't know what to do. I was pissed. I didn't know that I had some rights. She said, you're welcome to take it down at your expense, and I just got indignant, and I did. $2,800 later, I took down her tree. So, but let's talk about the tree is dying. Your tree is dying, A, and then B, your neighbor's tree is dying. And I'm going to let Charlie talk about this, but there is a Georgia's fallen tree responsibility law. Because absent there being damage to the tree, just so you know, absent there being disease in the tree, when a tree falls, it is the responsibility of the person whose property it falls on. It doesn't matter that it was on your property. It doesn't matter that it's on their property falling on your property. Wherever the tree falls, you're responsible, unless the tree was dying. And this is what I didn't know. So Georgia's fallen tree responsibility law, I'll just read you a little excerpt. Even more important, however, trees show signs of disease, look unhealthy, or died altogether, are dangerous to property nearby. Always take proper action to remove these dangers from your property. In the event one of these trees falls or causes injury or even death, you'll be personally liable under the fallen tree responsibility law. Charlie, talk to us a little bit about that and what that really means.
Well, one thing to remember first and foremost is figure out whose tree it is. And obviously a lot of times it's evident, but with the number of canopy coverage that we have in like 80%, obviously there's a lot of small lots. There's a lot of trees that are close to the line.
Mm-hmm.
So first and foremost, you got to figure out whose tree it is. Live, dead doesn't really matter. First, whose is it? So if it's evident, that's one thing. If it's in the middle of somebody's yard, what's interesting, and I actually had to refresh myself on this. If it's on the property line, it's actually both, and it doesn't matter if it's 50%, 50%, 90%, 10%. If a portion of the tree trunk is on the property line, that means it's actually both people's tree at that point.
And
So
you would have found that out during due diligence when you did a survey?
Yeah, if you got a survey, if you didn't get a survey, if you don't have a survey, you really can't be 100% sure, because a lot of the neighborhoods in town, I mean, they got these old plats and these pins, you never really know, and trees get a lot bigger over time, obviously. So, you know, if there's a tree that you're concerned about before you buy one, or while you're living there, I would, you know, $500 usually, you get a survey, and that's the only way that you're really gonna be sure. That's also fodder for, if you ever have to go to court, you've got the survey, it's like, this tree is on the line, or it's not on the line. You know, so first and foremost, whose tree is it?
Okay.
And then, going back to what JD just mentioned, you know, there's a distinction about, before, if it falls, you know, a lot of times you're worried about things before they fall, and that's where a lot of the action is. After it falls, if it was a naturally occurring thing, a storm, and there's no evidence of it being diseased or dead, it's just like JD.
Remember that point, because Carrie's going to talk about that's considered an act of God, and we'll make a distinction between an act of God and a clear day when the tree falls. So,
Right. So let's talk about first, like before closing. We're not talking about due diligence. We're talking about real life. And a tree falls. If it's naturally occurring, then basically it's all about the property line. Whatever's on your side, you got to clean up. Whatever's on their side, they got to clean up. There's really no liability there if there's no proof of disease or death or that it was dead. I don't care.
yeah, they go on to say if a neighbor tree falls on your property and causes injury or damage, you want to keep any evidence to show that the tree itself was diseased or dead. Pictures are a great tool. Taking photographs of the fallen tree can be great evidence, whether there's signs of disease or decay. And that's what I didn't know, because when I had the tree guy come out, they started from the top down and they took that diseased piece off and it just crumbled and fell. I should have told him to stop right there. I really should have. I saved myself about $2,500. Could have paid him to limb off the top of that tree and stuck her with it and said, your tree's dying. You know, but I didn't. I did the right thing. But had I known, you know, I could go back and the damage that she caused to my property, I could have had an arborist come and look at that and say, yeah, this is a dead, diseased tree. But talk about in that scenario, and then we'll talk about the act of God. But what can I do to protect myself?
Before it falls?
Yeah, it's my tree that's diseased. Obviously, I'm looking at having it taken down. That's the one and only thing that I can do, right, to prevent injury or property damage to myself or to my neighbor, is to have that thing taken down. We were supposed to have an arborist here today. I'm sorry you couldn't make it. But let's talk about if had I put her on notice, how could I have put her on notice that the tree was diseased? Because she said she had an arborist look at it, and I know she didn't. And what would I have done? What are the steps that I would have done afterwards to reclaim that cost?
You know, I'll talk about like sort of, you know, what I would do, because whenever you're doing all this kind of stuff, you're worried about liability. You're preparing yourself for litigation, which doesn't happen that much, but you're kind of putting together a file that you're going to have to give to a third party at some point and look at this evidence that I had. So that's, I'll give you sort of academic. I'm sure Carrie's lived through this many times, so he can tell you what actually happens when this stuff happens. But so if it's your tree and you think it's dying or dead or diseased, obviously you don't need to give. If you want to take it down, that's probably a good thing. If you're really by the book and say, listen, I think it might be disease, I don't want to spend money on this unless it really is, then really the only thing you can do is get an arborist out.
Get an arborist.
If it's yours.
And that's important, because in that are a couple of things, because getting an arborist to opine whether it's dead or not, and then there's the permitting process, right?
Right.
Make
And
sure
the permit.
they're
and-
certified.
Yeah,
Certified
certified arborists. And in most counties, just so you know, pines don't require any permit. They look at, DeKalb County, for instance, looks at pine trees as weeds. You can take as many of them down as you want to. You don't need a permit. They're usually about, depending on the size of the tree, $900 to $1,000 versus $2,000 to $3,000 for a hardwood, because they're harder to get down, right? The pine trees are the most dangerous because they're soft, and they sway and they break during storms, and the majority of the trees that come down in Atlanta are pines. So there's that of the getting someone to opine, a certified arborist, that it's diseased, and then having the tree taken out. If it's a pine, you don't need a permit. Check with your county and city.
City of
with
Atlanta
that.
is very different.
Yes, it's very, very different, but more often than not, my clients and myself with a pine tree, take it down and ask forgiveness later if anybody asks. So that, I'll leave it to you to do that.
So if it's your tree and you think, hey, maybe it doesn't look right, the leaves are falling off a little bit, I want to, in abundance of caution, let me see if I need to take this down, because I don't want to spend the $3,000 on it unless it's diseased. Well, you get an arborist out there and you get a letter that says, you know what, no, it's okay, then file that away. And then if it does fall, then you've got that, your neighbor's going to say, that thing was diseased. Well, I've got this paper dated this time from the arborist saying that it was.
There you go.
So that's, and that's really the gold standard.
And that letter's only good, it's got a time.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, and, all these things are really fact dependent, but if you really go to litigate it. If it gets to that point, and the thing is, if that letter's 2 days old, that's a lot better evidence than 6 months old.
There you
So
go.
there's a lot, there's shades of gray on these things. There's a lot of black lines, like whose tree is it? But sometimes there are some shades of gray. So the more evidence you have, pictures are good, but arborist letters are obviously better.
There you go. That's a great segue into scenario 2. Tree falls during a storm, which is an act of God. And the first thing you're supposed to do is what? Call your insurance company. So Carrie Mitchell with State Farm, talk to us through the process of.
Let me first caution you about
Sure.
that. You said I had business experience, and that's the secret with insurance companies, one I don't disagree with. When you call them and put in a claim, it counts against you. So you need to have a good relationship with that insurance agent to say, because the damages may not meet your deductible.
I'm glad you brought that
And
up.
so you want to make sure, and so if that call came to my office, I said, let me get somebody out to look at it. And then let's make a decision from there. We'll do what you want.
So it doesn't damage me just to call, if somebody comes out and looks at it,
Well,
it's not really a claim,
if
right?
they send a claim adjuster out, it's a claim. If I send a contractor out from my office, it's not a claim
There you go.
because it's never put in the system.
Yep. So the tree falls and it just falls in my yard. Do I have a claim, Carrie?
Absolutely not. You're protecting property, you're not protecting the man.
And can I get my chainsaw out and start removing that tree and hire a contractor to come take it away?
Yep.
Absolutely. And if you're gonna suggest that to a client, if they call you first, which has happened to me, they call me first because they don't know what to do. I say, first of all, you're gonna call your insurance company. Is there any portion of it that's on the house? And you know how when people have a car wreck, it could be a fender bender. They want to stop in the middle of Lennox Road and get out and preserve the scene because they just dinged somebody's bumper. It's drivable. Get it off the road, right? If there's a tree limb on a house, it's perfectly okay. If it's a small limb they can take, if they can, take a chainsaw or something and just get it out of the way till they can have an adjuster come put a tarp on it, have an adjuster come,
Take pictures.
protect the
Take
property.
pictures.
Take pictures, but protect the property, But I wanted to just clarify that because I've had clients before where neighbor's tree fell in the yard, and they, first of all, they didn't realize it's their responsibility because it's on their property. And second, don't call your insurance company because it's not a claim. If it didn't hit the patio, or hit the garage, or hit the dwelling itself, you have no claim. Go ahead, Carrie.
The insurance company is not, if it's a dead tree or a damaged tree and it's not on the structure, they're not going to replace it. It's your responsibility.
Okay.
You're better off if it lands in the yard, grab a friend and help put it on the house or something. Yes.
I had a friend client that her neighbor's not diseased tree in a huge storm fell onto her roof.
Yep.
And you could see it, laying on the roof. And what she had learned was, and please tell me if this is just for her insurance company or in general, was The insurance company was only going to pay anything if it had punctured the dwelling. Just lying on the dwelling wasn't enough, it had to go through the dwelling. And she got lucky and a branch went through
Right.
and made a hole in the roof, but they told, I mean, she had to get a crane and take it off, but they told
Yeah,
her.
I'm not familiar with that.
Wouldn't that be that'd be a question about the deductible and
Yeah.
filing a claim, Rob?
Yeah, that would probably may come on the deductible as to how much damage, because typically if a tree lands on it, if it's sizable, there's gonna be some damage, whether it's just the gutters being taken away from the house. There's gonna be some
That's
damage.
good, because say it didn't meet your deductible, say it just damaged the gutter. Because in my case, the cabana, it just hit the gutter, thank God it didn't hit the metal roof. So it was like $500 damage. So my deductible is $3,500 based on my home value. But talk about how you should you even maybe get a contractor out there to look at it before you call the claim adjuster?
Yeah, that's what I always recommend. When they call my office, we're actually gonna send someone out there. If I don't go myself, I'm gonna send a contractor out, and that contractor's gonna evaluate. Even for all claims, I do this on homeowners claims, we're gonna evaluate it. And it's somebody I trust, and if they tell me there's, for instance, hail damage, or if they tell me it's damaged, then we're gonna get a claim going right away. And that's to preserve the customer and their claims free on there, because there will be surcharge for that claim later,
Alright.
even if it's $0.
Let's say lightning hits the tree and splits it in half. Gigantic tree's hanging over your house ominously, but it hasn't actually hit the house yet.
It's yours.
Yeah.
It's yours.
You have to safeguard your property.
You gotta safeguard your property. If it hasn't hit the house yet, you gotta have it taken down, because, and in this scenario, the article that I was reading said maybe the homeowner should have just waited until the limb fell on his house, then he could have gotten the insurance company to cover it, but, you know, who wants to go through that?
Right.
I mean, honestly.
They can deny that claim. They can prove that you had it as an imminent danger on your home and left it alone. They can deny that
sure.
claim.
If you are,
Learn something new.
you are supposed to safeguard your home or keep it in a insurable condition, I'm not sure if they would deny it. It depends on the company, because it still hasn't hit the home. I mean, trees lean all the time, and they'll lean for years. So that one may be on a gray area, and it'd really be left to the interpretation of that claim adjuster when you show it about.
Yeah, because an adjuster's job is to protect who?
The insurance company.
Right. They're doing their work, just like underwriters' jobs are to protect the lender, right? And appraiser's jobs. Okay, so we talked about trees dying. Yes.
I've got a question for Carrie. So, you know, you may have just answered it. Say you've got a big, huge tree that is dead. Like you can see, there's no leaves on it for 2 years, and it's a huge tree over a little house that's gonna call, if it falls, and it's yours, it's all yours. And if it falls, it's gonna be a total loss. Is there any value in calling your insurance person and say, hey, listen, come look at this, because if this falls, I'm making a claim and it's gonna be 20 grand for y'all. There's just no point in it. You just got
No point.
Yeah,
No one's
until it
gonna,
happens, right?
So what happens is.
even at your house, or if it's falling to somebody else's, it doesn't really matter until,
Right.
okay.
But to the point that JD brought up earlier is, you know, they got an arborist, and the arborist says it's fine. I would actually recommend taking a picture of it, emailing it to yourself, instead of notified neighbor
Yeah.
that that the tree was diseased somehow.
Crazy thing is I did that. I sent her
certified
pictures of
Certified,
the
certified.
Oh.
I recommend that, but they cannot sign for a certified letter. But at least you have documentation of the conversation.
Yeah.
Because what happens is, they may not give you their insurance information, and probably won't, to file it against their insurance. But you can file it against yours, and then there may be a subrogation process where you get your deductible back, because now you have documentation.
Say that again?
So there's a subrogation process, and subrogation is that I'm not at fault, you're at fault, I can demonstrate that you're at fault, my insurance companies will take care of making me whole, or taking care of the claim, but then they're gonna go back after you or your insurance company.
Just like in an automobile accident,
Yeah.
your car insurance pays first, but then they subrogate to go after the other party.
And they will give you your deductible back when that happens, if and when that happens.
Okay, I think I know the
If you're
answer to
successful.
this, but this happened 2 years. I live in a neighborhood with 30-year-old trees everywhere. And we're on 4 acres with a ton of trees. We had, it was on not a busy street, but a side street. and it was in the middle of the night, bad storm, and a limb fell on that street. And 6 o'clock, when it was dark in the morning, a neighbor drives and doesn't see it. Luckily, it wasn't too much damage. We kind of like worked it out, but it's kind of one of those things, like it's the middle of the night. What are you going to go out at like 2 o'clock in the morning and remove it?
Are you asking like who's responsible? So there was automobile damage for the neighbor that hit the tree?
That is correct.
Okay, so how do you? So it'd be the auto
tree-
carrier.
Well, the tree, yeah, his auto insurance is gonna take care of that. If the storm landed in the street, his auto insurance.
Okay, so that person was at fault that didn't see it, or was it my fault that there was a tree from my yard in?
It's a storm, it's an act of God, so
Okay,
it's
got it,
his
yeah, cause
fault.
it wasn't dead or.
Yeah.
Unless said neighbor who had auto damage had already put that other neighbor on notice that your tree is dying,
Yeah,
and then they could subrogate and go after them, so, yeah, that's a big deal. All right, so we talked about trees dying, Georgia's fallen tree responsibility law, it's on you if you know your tree's dying, it's on the neighbor if you can put it on them. Number 2, tree falls during a storm is an act of God. But let's talk about tree falls, there's no storm, it's clear day. Any distinction? Any difference?
From the insurance perspective, they're not gonna draw a distinction between it. If it's damaged, if it's your tree, it falls on your property, they're gonna take care of it. Somebody mentioned unless they, it was noticeable disease, and they do come out and do home inspections. And if they notice that, somebody could document that, and you'll be put on notice that you need to take care of it.
We had a huge pine come across La Vista when I was on vacation last year in August. And I mean, it came across and it just obstructed La Vista and landed in my side yard. The neighbor across the street had a tree removal company come and take care of what was on his property and threw all the big chunks that were in the road over into my side yard. So I was $600 out of pocket to have that removed. After I got indignant one afternoon and started dragging stuff over into their yard across La Vista, and the lady came out, "Oh, you stop, my husband will take care of this later." Nothing. So if it falls in your property, and it was a clear day, by the way. It was probably a week after a storm, but it was a gigantic pine. And it, thankfully, when it fell, there was a car coming, and the car just like hit it, didn't really damage the car that much. But had that car been another 2 seconds, well, absolutely. Clear day. The other one that fell on La Vista, I heard it, I was working at home, and it was an oak, and I don't know how the guy survived, but it went right into the top of the car, and when I got there on the sidewalk, it had caved the top of the car in to where, but the guy, it had knocked him over to the side, and his foot was on the accelerator, so it was holding the car in place, and the tires were just, it took an hour for the jaws of life for them to cut out, and the guy survived. I don't know how. But it was a clear day, and then just all of a sudden we heard this boom in the middle of traffic on the distance. So you never know. Be ever vigilant when you're driving through an area like that. So.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When let's say it's a townhouse community and the parking is outside, and there's a tree around the parking lot. So what do? You tell the HOA, hey, it's looking funny because the branches are starting to come down over the cars. And they're like, oh, it looks so pretty, we don't want to, because that's what's happening to me. So, my car, the one is under the branches. So I was like, it looks pretty, we don't want to cut it. But I'm like,
What
the
county?
branches are getting, and
Sure.
after the last rain, when I came out of the house this morning, I could tell it was like even lower than I have to live.
What county do you live in?
Cobb County.
Cobb.
Or not.
My recommendation would be to call the Cobb County arborist and have the arborist come out. And it may take a week or 2 for them to get there. But if you can get documentation from the Cobb County arborist and then send a certified letter to the HOA,
Yeah, because something happened to my car, like.
yep, they're on notice. You've just officially put them on notice that that's their responsibility.
Litigation.
Yeah, they've got, HOAs have insurance, obviously they've got a policy, and they can be liable under the same principles that we're talking about now, just like your neighbor can be.
But to force their hand, that's the process that I would use, so you're not out of pocket. Rely on your county, your county resources. It takes a little longer, but if it's not, if it's not impending doom, it's just, you're keeping an eye on it. Take lots of pictures, document every letter or email that you send to the HOA. Have the Cobb County arborist come and look at it. Because the county wants to make sure that they're, keeping an eye on those things too, even if it's on private property. Because again, 80% of the trees are on private property, so.
So kind of along those lines, instead of the car, tree falling and hitting neighbor's house, tree falls, act of God, not diseased tree, hits neighbor's car, that's neighbor's comprehensive coverage. Yeah, they could try to sue you to pay for their car, but
Yeah.
that's just bad
It's on
luck
them.
and on the neighbor, right?
Bad luck.
Yep. You know, while we're on that subject with the county and all that, one of the trees I had taken out in my front, and you don't know what you don't know, right? But my survey showed that from the street, and this is the case in most areas in town, from the street, 15 feet in from the street is county right of way. Even though I've got beautiful rose beds and these two trees, they weren't my trees. And that's more often than not a department called Roads and Drainage, that you really gotta get them involved, and you gotta get the county arborist involved. And I was so frustrated, I finally had the darn tree taken out because I was afraid it was gonna fall on traffic and create, cause damage. But that's something to keep in mind. You think it's on your property, or you think it's on the neighbor's property, but unless you get a survey during due diligence, I think it's really important anywhere there's trees, to get a survey for that very reason, to know whether a tree is on property line, whether it's on county right of way. If it's on county right of way, then it's on them, and you can just blow them up until they finally do something about it. And had I known what I know now, I would have done that. I would have gotten the county arborist involved, and I would have continually bugged the Department of Roads and Drainage until they leaned on whoever comes and takes that stuff out.
One of the things we talk about, a tree on the property line. So say there's a dead tree on a property line. Now you basically, in order to do anything with it, if it falls either way, it's going to be, it's going to be on yourself. So, if it's on the line and it falls towards your neighbor, technically that's not your problem because it's part of their tree too. So but you can't just cut it down, or do anything with the tree that's on the property line because there's joint ownership there. So you really need to consent. So don't just take a chainsaw into a dead tree if it's on the property line. I mean, probably that's, what's going to happen anyway, but technically it has to deal with the tree. You have to have consent of both owners. And like I said, just a little bit of that tree trunk needs to be on there for there to be, a problem between the two, or consent needs to be required to do anything with it. And if you've got a dead tree and it's clearly on the line and you want to take it down and your neighbor doesn't, well, you can't, don't do it. You can still, because there's not a lot of damages, but they would be right in court if they said they did something with this tree and I said they couldn't. Ultimately, it could go to court, and a judge would have to decide on the facts, like, okay, we should take this tree down, or no, you can't touch it. So consent of both people is needed if it's on the line.
There you go. I want to open it up to actual real world scenarios and questions. Did you have?
Yeah, I mean, this just happened like a week ago. So, client has a house, tree fell, it's on his property, fell into the neighbor's. Neighbor calls me, because she knows in the neighborhood and she knows that I sold that house. Tree is on my property, can you have them cut it down? Well, then we closed and it was the new owner's house. So, and it wasn't, it was a little complicated. Luckily, they kind of, worked it out, but I know that's probably gonna come up again.
So let me recap. The tree fell before closing, and then after closing, who's responsible for the removal?
Yeah.
The previous owner, the previous owner or the current owner of the property?
Right, or should the previous owner, when it fell, do they take it all out, or it's like on half and half?
If it was a live tree, it's really the property line.
It's the property line.
Yeah.
Because Matt Brown couldn't be here today. There was a $2 million house in Chastain he sent me a picture of. And similar scenario, tree fell on neighbor. Who's responsible for removal? And the answer is, on that property line, that neighbor is responsible for the removal. But the tree was, across the property line. How do you cut it? I guess the person whose roof it's on needs to have it cut and then leave, what may be on the damaging properties.
So is that my responsibility to tell the new owner about that? Luckily, it worked out, but.
Well, I think, a walkthrough is important, or drive-by is important, like the day of closing. I mean, technically, it just passes on to the buyer. I mean, really,
Yeah.
as far as the property. Now, if there was some ongoing litigation, or there was some
Right.
insurance
Oh,
claim,
yeah.
I mean, the waters get a little muddy there.
Yeah.
And then if you didn't disclose something like that.
Yeah, wasn't a material fact as far as your liability, wasn't a material fact before closing, it's just something that happened.
But if the tree's just, if the tree was just in the neighbor's yard, it's still their responsibility.
Right.
Right, okay, that's a good
There's
point.
there's really
So
nothing.
there's nothing to be done there.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. It's just, obviously, they've got something to clean up on their yard that they just bought, which would just be the tree that is on their side,
Right. Got it.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry if you've already covered
Sure,
this.
go ahead.
but I have, it's a real situation with me. I have a very, very nice neighbor and they have a huge ginormous tree. And it leans on my home and I've requested them, I've called the arborist already. They're out, they're not gonna be there till the middle of July. So what steps do I take? Because I do feel it is a question of time. It's not,
It's a great review of what we talked about. Go ahead, Carrie.
So the first question I was asked is, there's an appearance that it's diseased or dying in some way.
no,
It's just overgrown, probably.
It's overgrown.
Yeah.
So the trunk is on their yard,
yes,
but the branches are coming over.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's really, they have no liability for that.
Can they cut it back?
Ooh.
They can, if they choose to. They don't
Do they have to let you know?
They-
Interesting, because
Right, yeah.
that draws into air rights, so if it's hanging over on your property, do I need their permission?
I didn't, what I've read is that technically you do have the right to clean up on the air on your
Okay.
property line. So you could, and I wouldn't do it without talking to anybody, because you might be inviting,
Yeah.
a waste of time, because anybody can sue anybody for anything. They take you to court, even if they have no idea what they're talking about. So you don't wanna go, even though you know you're right, it's not a great idea to not do that without communicating. But technically, from what I've read, and I haven't seen any major, court cases on it, but the general principles are that you can trim it up, just
Yeah.
like, even if the truck is all the way on the other side.
Because the short answer for you is, it's incumbent on you to have that tree removed, because if it falls, then you're gonna pay your deductible. So
Right.
you need to, even though it's leaning or it's overgrown, if it's not diseased, that's the litmus test there. If it's not diseased, it's incumbent on you to either wait till it falls and pay your deductible, or work it out with the seller, say, look, I'm happy to have it removed, I just need your permission. And in my case, it was cheaper to have it removed for $2,800 than
I
it was
would
to
too,
pay.
because it
Yeah.
would just really destroy part of my house.
Right, and then the
Yes.
headache and hassle that you have to go through, and all of that's just not worth it, so.
Yeah, I
Thank
think from a real world example, the thing I've learned, and John, I told JD about it. First thing is, know your neighbors. If you don't know your neighbors, when something like this happens, you're pretty much just left with court.
Well, yeah, it makes things a lot harder. and
Yeah,
expensive.
so my example, it was about damage from a tree that fell during a storm. There was nothing wrong with the tree. Had an arborist come out, he checked all the trees out, gave me a certified letter. The tree had fallen just from about 25 feet up, just the top of it fell. Right onto my fence, which is 3 feet inside our property line, but enough that the guy who lives in the neighborhood, who's 100, 200 yards behind me, who I've never met, never had a beer with, never played golf with, comes over and got uppity, and I just said, wait, I don't know what happened, what you're talking about, just let me go back and look. And the tree had fallen and broken my fence, and it landed in his yard. So my first call was trouble. After I called insurance first, but it was the weekend, and they didn't get back to me, so I called Charlie, and he said, I explained the situation. He goes, well, technically, they're responsible for the stuff in their yard, you're responsible for that. I said, perfect, okay. I emailed him and told him that. 6 months later, after the hurricanes came, the tree on our neighbor that I know fell on the neighbor next to him, smashed the house right now. I mean, just destroyed. And so, of course, he was nervous and got scared. And he came over and said, look, I would like you to cut down all the trees that are facing my yard that could fall. That could fall. Okay, well, again, let me take a look. Had the arborist come out, and he said they're not diseased, they're perfectly fine. It would cost this amount of money to have them removed. And I said, so what are my options? And Charlie and I had this discussion. He said, no, they're welcome to remove those trees at their cost.
If you allow.
If you
If I allow them to come over,
Right,
and
that's what I mean.
it's just wood, so they could destroy that. As long as they don't destroy the fence, they could just destroy that back. I wouldn't care. And unfortunately, my arborist decided he wanted to email him directly and said, yes, it'll cost you this amount of money to have those trees removed. And the guy went ballistic and sent this nasty email to me. And he was replying back to him, but copied me. And I immediately picked up the phone and called the arborist. I said, what are you doing? He said, you've made now a situation that's, it's kind of tense. Like,
World War III.
Yeah, it's just, I had asked him, to send me the certified letter, send me the information, and I'll email it to him, and we'll just work it out that way. And he goes, no, I want to do this. I'm like, okay. Well, he didn't send the letter, he just said, it's gonna cost you just like $5,000 to remove these trees. So, the neighbor part comes up. If I had known this guy and had a beer with him, I'd probably be a little more willing to work with him. But now, if something happens, I'd be like, sorry, dude, here's my certified letter, here's the issue.
That's good
This is the way I got
advice.
it. But
Yeah.
knowing your neighbors
Yeah.
would definitely change.
And
'Cause I got
I know
same
them very
situation.
well, and they said we were thinking about it.
Yeah.
Well, like, do something.
But the arborist thing cost about, it was like he came out for 2 hours, walked around the thing, and it cost like $100 for his time, and then another $100 for the letter.
If you go get 3 quotes and
Okay.
give them, do the legwork, say, look,
Okay.
I'll
I
share,
can
I'll
do
split
it.
the cost.
Yeah.
I could-
Offer to
Right.
split the
And that's where that
cost.
neighbor
Because
thing comes in.
I'm telling,
That's what I would've done with
all
him.
my home was
Perfect
just.
example.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I would do. I'd be happy, if you wanna split the cost, and if you're
Yeah.
that concerned,
Okay.
I'm happy to have this conversation.
Yeah,
But
it's
I'm
sometimes
not
that
gonna do
works.
it as a maybe my death
Yeah,
situation.
this hag wasn't having it, she's like, you can move it at your cost.
Yeah.
So, whatever, but.
So, your issue, it depends on where you live.
Yeah.
Right. Like you live in unincorporated DeKalb, you can pretty much cut down any tree and nothing probably is likely to happen. It's very unlikely.
Yeah.
You live in with the city limits
Yeah.
and they've got different rules, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah,
You might not
the
even
arborist
be
explained it to
allowed
me, too.
to cut
But it
down.
depends, it's back to what JD said,
Yeah.
it depends on the trees. If they're pines,
Right.
it won't matter.
Yeah.
Hardwoods,
Yeah.
Right,
They're-
and now you live in Sandy Springs, so this happened to somebody I
Do
know.
it now?
She lives in Sandy
No.
Springs, there's a big
You
tree in
kept
her
calling me by
yard,
my
and she
last
was
name.
worried it was diseased. Sandy Springs arborist comes out, says there's nothing wrong with it, and if you wanna take it down, you can, and here's the fine you pay in Sandy Springs for the removal of a healthy tree.
There you go.
So it was gonna cost her over $4,000 between
Right.
the fine and the tree removal. So
Yeah,
she
they
was
would
like,
rather the
well,
tree fall.
Right, so she's like, okay, so it's healthy, and it would cost me $4,000 to $5,000 to get rid of it, I guess I'm going to leave it. Guess what tree just crushed?
Yeah, so if her
Her
deductible was
house, a few years
$3,000,
later.
would she have been better,
Well, she also, the arborist told her it wasn't diseased.
So
then
arborists that work on
Unless it's
municipalities
obvious.
are not the best
Right.
arborists. 'cause
So-
That's a good point.
So,
I'm just telling you.
Did y'all hear that?
So-
Arborists that work for municipalities aren't the best resource, they're not, they're free.
Well, and
They're
they're
not
about protecting the city, which doesn't always mean they're protecting
Right.
like real trees and real
right,
homeowners.
so in the end, now she's living in an apartment, her house is crushed, and when they started to cut it up,
It was disease.
then they found
Ah.
a diseased part, so that arborist told her wrong.
Yeah.
Because you can collect a lot of money for the city on trees, like.
On those
I work
fines,
with the
on those
board,
fines, yeah,
you
and make them,
pay the city a
and
lot of money. on
profit
trees.
centers, so, yeah, but just know that you wanna take out some healthy trees and
So
you
it was
live in-
diseased on her property, she found it was diseased, but that tree was on her property?
It was on her property.
Ah,
Yeah, but she wanted to take it out and the city told
Got
her
it.
a couple of years ago, you have to pay us a fine to take out this healthy tree.
because the arborist didn't catch it.
Nope, the arborist said it was healthy.
Happens.
Yep.
2 questions. So if you have a tree on your property and it's affecting the neighbor and the neighbor is willing to pay for you to cut it down and you come to some agreement.
That-
you
wait,
hire-
if it's on your property, the neighbor doesn't have to agree, you can do whatever you want.
Let's
Is
say,
it on your
let's say it's
property?
like sort of on your property but hanging over, the example that you guys gave before.
Uh-huh.
And it's not diseased or anything, but they're worried about it, like I think in her case. And she's okay with paying for it, the neighbor is okay with the cost. But then it's their tree on her property. She hires somebody to go and it's, based on their agreement. And that person somehow, in the process of cutting it down, damages her.
You want a bonded
Who's
tree,
responsible?
yeah, you wanna make sure that, thank you for bringing that up, cause there are a lot of bubbas that can, take down trees.
Yeah.
You wanna look for bonded and insured.
Bonded and insured.
And then read when they give you an estimate, read what their disclaimers are, whether they're gonna accept liability,
Yeah.
blah, 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 because they could, that's very important, because it should be on the tree.
I'm sorry, I
Actually-
paid for that bonded insurance. but it's
Actually,
worth it now.
Yeah.
you wanna ask for a certificate of insurance, because they'll have to get that day, or within a few days, to let you know for sure they're insured. Because they'll walk around with certificates of insurance. They got insurance, they could have let it lapse 3, months ago.
Wow.
But they still have that certificate, and if you don't check the dates on it, you don't know if they're insured currently or not.
Call the
Yeah.
insurance company. We had a guy use whiteout. He had it, it was expired.
Yep.
He gave it to us, it says he were, okay, and he was recommended highly. Well, he used whiteout or something. And
On
so
the
call
expiration
the
date.
insurance company and make sure that that company or person is insured as of that
Wow.
day.
Learn something new, yeah.
One other question. Will you give an example of knowing your insurance agent instead of calling for a claim? Call you, you'll send a contractor. Is that a cost that the homeowner would? Okay, so
No,
there's
But not every company does that.
Correct.
There is-
Yeah.
I have to
That's-
say, when
that's
you agree,
the-
that's.
I'm
That's a
not- And that's
relationship.
with anything, I'm gonna tell
Yeah.
you, like, you got a leak, anything, call your insurance company, they don't want you to have a claim, your rates will go up, you'll use somebody else. Just make sure, if it doesn't meet your deductible, might be better for you just to pay out of pocket.
It's good to know the agent, because you can have that honest conversation, I have them all the time, and it's usually, so I have vendors who want to do business and want referrals, and so they know that if, I have one rule, you get twice to screw up, and then you're off my list. The first time, shame on you, the second time, shame on me, won't be a third time.
So you could potentially ask your agent before anything happens,
Sure.
or like who's your contact, in case.
And that's important,
If it's a
because
weekend
ask your
or you can't
agent, not
reach
the
them.
800 number, because it was over
Right.
the weekend once, and I had a little bit of roof damage, because my bathroom was leaking upstairs, and I called the State Farm 800, and all I did was ask, what is my deductible, and is it wind damage, is it storm damage, how does all that work? You know what she did? She filed a $0 claim.
Yes,
I have a
claim.
claim now,
Yeah.
because I made an inquiry
Yeah.
to their claims hotline, instead of call my State Farm agent on Monday, I just, called the claim. So make sure you talk to the agent and not the claims.
Yeah, because if you think about it, the 800 numbers, this is for all companies, they're $10, $11, $12 an hour, they're just data entry.
It's on their page,
They're
they
not
don't know if
asking
it's
any
on
questions.
questions.
Yeah.
So you want somebody who's gonna be more responsible.
We got time for a couple more.
I'll tell them my own tree experience. So
Okay.
Actually, last year during a storm, it was actually, I have about 3/4 of an acre lot, and probably a good third of it is very wooded,
Mhm.
and right here in Brookhaven. And so it was last year during a storm, and actually, one of my trees way back there, you don't even really see, did fall. And my neighbor just happened to park his car in the back of his yard, which it went towards him, hit their car. So it was they made a car insurance for the damage. But I like I'm buddies with my neighbor, and it's just being neighborly. He arranged getting the tree removed, but I said, look, I'll pay for it, because I wanna be nice neighbors for the next, how many more years I plan to live here. $1,000 to not have a, Hatfield McCoy experience for the rest of my life while I live
There you
there.
go.
And, but
That's-
anyway,
do
it
the
was
right
not
thing.
my responsibility, cause
Yep.
the portion that's on my yard was like next to nothing,
Yeah.
it was all his,
Yeah. I
but
agree.
yeah, the car took care of, their insurance took care of their car.
Yeah, to add insult to injury, when I had said tree removed and a piece of it, fell in her janky old front yard, which is
Yeah.
just all weeds, she wanted to tell me how it was gonna be remediated, and how it was gonna have sod put in, and this, that, and the other. When, she should have done the right thing and I did for her what she wouldn't do for
Yeah.
herself, and that is remove a dangerous tree, But yeah, being a good neighbor and doing the right thing sometimes is,
Just to, yeah.
so I got out there with a rake and a bag of $20 grass seed. And then she wanted to tell me they needed to cover it with straw, and I pretty much told her where she could go.
I got your straw.
I got your straw. Short end. One more.
One more, sorry.
Two more.
Okay, so if you're representing the buyer and they're made an offer on this house or on the contract, and you observe, or during your due diligence, you observe some trees that look diseased or, or need to come down for whatever reason, wouldn't it be best to try and negotiate that?
Absolutely.
As opposed to like the other example when you.
They can ask an arborist, they can do the same whole thing.
Yeah.
Get an arborist, check it out, and that's something you can just.
Seller may not agree to, but I've written offers before that, and that time to do that's during the amendment to address concerns. I wouldn't do it as part of your offer. I would do it during the ATAC, and they may or may not agree to it, but
Or give some
chances are
cash. Get some cash.
give cash toward closing costs or whatever, but that's the time to really go at it. Just depends on if you think the inspection, you pick your battles. If you think you're gonna have issues in inspection, it's an older house, You might wanna write it in your offer, you know, it just depends on whether you're in a multiple offer situation or not, but yeah, that's a great time to start negotiating that. But certainly to make your buyer mindful that, hey, if the seller won't agree to this stuff, it's just something you need to budget for with this house. Because if it falls in the house, it's your responsibility, you know, so that's a
For the
great
most
way.
part, it's like termites, you're either gonna have them or you have them.
Yeah, it's not a matter.
It could be a tree problem.
That's a good point. It's not a matter of if, and I told my client that, not a matter of if you're gonna have termites and tree damage in Atlanta, Georgia, it's when, right? It's how to prevent it and what to do when it actually happens. You got a question?
So I live on a street with really small lots. They're all 50 by 100,
Mhm.
and it's the neighborhood is changing and growing, and there's a lot of new construction. They're building these houses so wide that the distance between the two houses is pretty small, and then they're putting up fences.
Yeah.
I have a neighbor who has a fenced-in backyard, but it doesn't go on the property line. There are 2 trees outside of the property line, so to access those trees, you'd have to go through the neighbor's yard that doesn't have a fence, right? And so they have had a lot of back and forth because that was a new construction with a builder who was like, I'm going to fence to your fence, and she was like, that's my land, you can't build a fence up to that. So there'd be this just little gap between the 2 yards with these trees. Who's responsible, like, for trimming and stuff like that? How would they access those trees without entering the other person's yard?
Take your fence panel.
Survey.
Yeah, you have to
Depends
take
on
down
which
your
property.
fence. and-
Depends on which property.
From the inside of your yard, you're gonna take one of those 6-foot panels off and.
They keep coming to me with
Or you
questions, and I'm like, oh.
Or you
Yeah, I mean, people feel like, act like fences are property lines, I mean, they're not.
Right, right.
Unless they've been there for 7 years.
Yeah, right, I mean, the thing is, yeah, it's.
Then they are the property line. Or they're your property.
I
Yeah.
purposely built, when I bought our house, I purposely built the fence 3 feet into our property.
Yeah.
So that there wouldn't be any kind of weirdness. Well, my neighbor came home one day, and I told Joyce, I came home, and they had 2 pit bulls, and they were putting a fence up, and I go, whoa, what are you doing? He's like, what do you mean? I said, you're on my property putting those fences on. So Charlie and I had a conversation, and basically the way it is you keep that survey, so if we sell the house, we can go to the neighbor and say, you need to take that fence down, and put that fence on our property.
Mhm.
That's what I kept telling her. I was like, you need to get a survey. If you don't have one, she's like, I have the neighbors and I have theirs. And I was like, you need your survey so you can say these trees are.
Or
on my
if you're
land,
being
or-
a good neighbor, you grant them an easement.
Right,
And-
Yeah.
and I would have had that conversation if he'd come over and asked me about putting that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Anything else as we wrap up here?
I'll do a quick rookie mistake in negotiating on tree removal in Grant Park where the trees are just very old and they're ginormous. And I thought I was so smart by getting 5,000 for my buyer because I had a very well-educated, very experienced arborist give me a quote of 5,000. So we negotiated 5,000. Turned out to be 8,000 because once they started cutting into that tree, it was rotten on the inside out. And so my buyer had the 5, but it cost him 3 because once they start that removal, it's like they just couldn't stop. And it turned out the tree was too unsafe to get their tree guys up into it.
Get a crane.
So then you had to bring a crane in. So be really careful when you're negotiating money in lieu of versus a seller having it taken down prior to closing.
That's great.
And were the stump removed, ground, do they grind it and shoot the mulch right in a pile? Do they grind it and haul it?
Mhm.
I fall into all those traps, just call me.
All right,
There
you
you go,
guys,
don't do
thanks
it.
for coming to learn more about trees. You guys have
Two final points here. One is know that your homeowner's insurance has liability protection for you. Your insurance company is gonna stand behind you up to that limit, and they're gonna hire attorneys if it goes to court. The second thing, and this is a totally different subject, is tree roots are a problem growing in the sewer systems as well. Huge issue. So that's another one you're probably gonna encounter at some point if you haven't, because they grow in there, and insurance is not gonna cover it.
Insurance doesn't cover from the house to the connection, does not cover that,
No.
right?
No.
Wait, repeat that.
And then you can.
Yeah, so from the house to the connection, the insurance company is not gonna take care of that, even
So
if you're on
tree
the
root,
septic.
if tree root grabs into that and it causes a backup in the
Cause
sewer
right
line
up the
like
sewer
that,
system, yeah.
whatever, that pipe between your house and the connection is not covered by your standard policies. And I don't think a lot of them even have riders, but there's some companies I think are like through the cities, so you pay $5 a month or something like that.
Yeah, we just redid our policy, State Farm did, and they have that now,
A
or just
rider.
cover the lines. They
Yeah.
have
Yeah, that was in the
riders to
news
cover.
last week. If the city offers that, and they are self-insuring that failure of sewer line from the house to the connection, I think it's a great idea for the buyer, the homeowner to go ahead and buy that, because the city's saying, I think Roto-Rooter in that news story wanted $6,000 or $7,000, and the city's cost is $1,200 if you bought that policy, if you bought that nominal
And
protection.
when that happens, I've had a neighbor that happened when I lived in Kirkwood, and because there's trees and those houses and those lines have been there forever, and those trees love to get close to that line. When that backs up into your house, you're gonna pay whatever it costs,
Mhm.
and people, and then you're looking back like, oh my God, how much did I just pay to do that? And people assume that you have coverage, and you don't unless you
There you go.
Are you aware if that $1,200 is good forever, or you have to renew it?
I don't, it was on Fox 5 or one of those, I was just in passing, you probably have to go Google it, I don't know, but I know it was City of Atlanta.
It's like on your monthly statement, you pay
Yeah.
like $5 a month or something, but then if something were to happen, then it would be that
You get that
$1,200.
reduced cost.
You get the reduced cost, but the insurance is a monthly.
And of course, Roto-Rooter said they weren't aware that the city offered that, so they were gonna charge you a
Yeah.
$5.
You can buy your own, cause I have one, cause I live on a cul-de-sac and 2 out of the 5 sewer lines on my cul-de-sac have gone, and then the second one went. I did some research, so I bought myself something called a sewer line warranty, and I think I pay like,
Through who, with a third party or?
through a third party, because Brookhaven and DeKalb don't have, at least at that time,
Right.
didn't have it, I get my water through DeKalb. So I bought the sewer line warranty, I have it on auto renew on my credit card, like $70-80 a year. My thought is,
Mhm.
for the $80, whatever they cover, I'll be happy to
When-
take.
When S happens.
Right.
Literally.
Right, and then they actually ended up insuring my water line from the street to the house for
Yep.
free as
I
a
do know
bonus
that
after the fact.
some members of our vendor program, Home Probe and National Property Inspectors, offer a 90-day sewer protection and water line protection. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people close and, 60 days later, 30 days later, the sewer line has failed or the water line has failed, and now they're just like, God, so make sure you look at our vendor program to see which one of those. I know it's Home Probe and National Property Inspector, but ask your inspection company if they offer that same warranty, because it's a real value add to the buyers. So.
Any recommendation of good arborist and bonded?
I was hoping you would have one, because clearly the one I asked to show, you didn't show, and then you had a flaky
He's out
one.
looking at
Even
trees.
that, they do, he was great, but that thing just totally pissed me
He was
off.
a maverick.
Yeah, I know exactly what he was doing. I was just like, you were trying to do business
Yeah.
on my own.
Carrie, do you have any,
I don't have an arborist, I have I have at least 3 tree lines.
there's usually a county agricultural exchange for every county, and I bet you the county agricultural exchange has, because those people, network together and they refer business out. Call the county agricultural exchange agent and ask who they recommend, if there's a list, and maybe on a website somewhere. Okay? All right, thank you guys for coming. Hope you learned something about a tree today.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, JD.
Yep.
Oh,
Have it, guys.